Hello everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. Today we are going to continue on with the recreation of this 1915-ish dress that so far looks like this. So if you haven't seen my other videos on this project so far, I have two out. I have one where we examine the actual antique, and then I have another one with the start of this. That was last week. I will link both of those videos down below. So at this point, I have the collar all cut out, and the collar needs to get its scallop finishing before it can be added on to the neckline. I don't think I'm going to bother with serging the inside of the neckline first, even though I would normally do that, just because the scallops should be a relatively quick thing. Then I can add these together and then just do some self-binding from this fabric and just bind that shut, and that will all be covered. So those are going to be the first steps, and then I'm going to move on to mocking up the sleeve. However, before I get into doing that, I just wanted to mention two things. First off, it's my 1-year vlogiversary. I'm so super excited. I have been vlogging now on this channel for 1 year, every week doing a vlog, a sewing vlog of like updating what my projects are like, and I cannot believe I've been going and doing this for a whole year, coming out with 2 videos a week. So that said, 2 videos a week is kind of crazy. I'm kind of crazy, and I know that it's not healthy for me to do this many videos this often, so sometimes I may only be doing 1 video a week depending on my schedule, but I'm going to try for the most part to stick with 2 for now. The other thing that is exciting this week is that this week's video is sponsored by Skillshare. So let's go over to sponsor Rebecca for a quick message about Skillshare. Thank you, Sewing Rebecca. Sponsor Rebecca here, and today's video is kindly sponsored by Skillshare. If you haven't yet heard of Skillshare, it is an online learning community for creative and curious people. On Skillshare, you can find thousands of inspiring classes on topics including basic sewing skills, photography, web design, productivity, and so many more. I just finished taking a brand new class on self-care, which was taught by Jonathan Van Ness of Queer Eye, and it was such a breath of fresh air. Jonathan really drives home the fact that it is just as important to schedule time for your self-care as it is to schedule appointments for work or anything else in your life. Because if you don't take time for yourself, you are not going to be the best you. And he teaches this class in a way that really just makes you feel great, even just while watching it. I highly recommend it. Skillshare classes are meant for your schedule. Many of the classes are under an hour, and you can pause, rewind, or rewatch classes as often as you like. And the great news is that the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description below will get a free 1-month trial of premium membership so that you can explore your creativity. Use my link down in the description to get your free trial of Skillshare today and unlock your limitless creative potential. And now, back to Sewing Rebecca. Thank you so much, sponsor Rebecca. Now we can go ahead and get into working on this collar. So as you can see, I started cutting out the scallops, but there was just something that felt kind of lacking about them. And I realized that is that third thread on the scallop. Because if you look at these scallops, that little like blue line right here, it just really helps to define the whole, all of the scallops. And I felt like what I was getting here was a really undefined scallop. And so this is the side that I had already started cutting, which is unfortunate because it means it's going to be much more difficult to do what I did. So this, on the other hand, is what the scallops will look like. I've only done this for about half of the collar so far. I still need to do the other half over here. But as you can see, I did a little blue stitch line right here. At first I did it with the blue thread that matches the blue of the fabric, but it was just way too bold. I did that on a test piece. But then I tried it with a light blue thread here, and I feel like it really helps. Like, it's defining those scallops super, super nicely, and it's kind of setting it off. It's just like the tiniest thing. And of course it takes a long time, but it is way easier to do it when this fabric is still on here. So that's why I'm going to leave the rest of it on. This is all done. You probably can tell if I get closer, but I've only done half of it so far. So like over here, I'm just not going to cut this until I have done that little blue line, but I think that's going to really, really help set the collar off just a little bit so that it doesn't blend in so much with the fabric of the bodice. So I feel like this binding can potentially be a little bit confusing here. So this is 1 1/4 inches wide on the bias, and I've just joined like 2 strips together over here, and I have attached it right sides together to the collar that is on top of the bodice. So this is right side, this is right side, this is right side on here. So it's right sides together here, but then these are both right. So anyway, that is all sewn on with like a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Basically, I just use the edge of my foot as my guide. And now this is going to get folded over here and pressed flat here. Like that. So that seam is all pressed flat. Then this part is going to get folded over the seam allowance like that and pressed. And then this is going to get folded like this so that the seam part right here is the edge. It's going to get folded like that, pinned in place, and with the interior on top, you're going to fold out the collar so that collar is here and bodice is here. And this part where you folded over the seam allowance, this is going to be here. You've already pressed that. I only pressed a little bit. And then you're going to top stitch right along the edge here of that bias sandwich there. So you are going to have stitches that show on the bodice, but it's going to be underneath the collar because the collar will flop down like that. So hopefully that makes sense. I will show you what it looks like when it's done. So I'm pressing it one more time here from the top of the collar here, so from the right side of the collar, just to get that crease having a nice press. I'm using my pressing ham as I go around the back of the neck because it is a tighter curve, but the rest of it I was able to do just fine on the sleeve board is what I used. I mean, I could have done it on the flat table too, I'm sure, but I was using the sleeve board because I have my cutting mat out right now. So this is what it looks like on the outside, and this is what it looks like on the inside. Just a nice, clean bind. Now we can go ahead and bind the front here. So this is the front that goes underneath. It's the flat side of the front. And this one gets a strip that's on the grain, and it's 1.75 inches wide. And that gets bound here, so right sides together, folded into the inside, and then stitched. And it doesn't matter, again, that there's stitches on the outside because this is the underlap. And the collar up here is included in that, so that gets put into the binding as well. I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. So here we go. Here is the finished facing. Looks very, very nice and neat. I got it right on the edge there. I am really happy with how that came out because honestly, it looks pretty much exactly like this one. I mean, down to the fact of like them having the stitching come through right here because of the point right there. I did the same thing. So obviously it still needs some closures and it still needs all those fake buttons too. The closures, I mean, are literally just snap, snap, bars once I put the waist stay in, and more snaps on the skirt. So yeah, very easy on the closures, but there will be buttons. I did pick up some buttons when I went to Joann's today. They're obviously not the exact same buttons as on here. It's going to be impossible for me to find these, especially locally, since I didn't think about sourcing buttons ahead of time. But even online, I looked up two-piece fabric covered buttons and came up with absolutely zero. So what I got were these. They're still 2-color. They're larger, which I like the larger scale on me. These are 3/4 inch buttons, and they will do nicely, I think, down the front and on the crossover and everything. I can't decide whether I'll do it with navy thread or with ivory thread, but they do have the holes like on the front of the button. So these are Le Mode. That's all the information on there if you're interested in those. And yeah, I think they'll do well picking up the colors. Technically this is supposed to be black, but it looks navy to me, so I think that'll work nicely. So that's where we are today. They're looking pretty similar. Tomorrow we're going to go ahead and add the sleeves. So this is the mock-up for my sleeve pattern, or rather the pattern shape for my sleeve pattern. This was the pattern from the Bambi dress, and I knew that it was going to be way too high, and honestly the whole thing is too big for the arm's eye considering this is supposed to be a fitted sleeve, but it was kind of like the closest thing I could go off of for one-piece sleeve. So I've drawn in a lower line right here. You can see it right there. That's going to be the new cut line for the top of the sleeve. This is the back. This is the front. The back on the extant sleeve is 1 inch longer than the front, and there is a little tuck kind of mid-sleeve. So I measured to where like my elbow is and put it there, even though this is the inner arm. So I don't know, I don't feel like it makes much sense, but I put it there anyway. And I also tapered out the same way that the accent sleeve does, which is that it goes in 3.75 inches from this point right here to the point down here at the wrist in the back, and in the front it goes in 2.25 inches from here to this point. That said, I think that's going to be way too big at the wrist because it has a fitted wrist too. So my wrist is not 12 inches, which is what this winds up being, or 11 inches, I guess, after the seam allowance. My wrist is not nearly that big. And honestly, I kind of think that this whole sleeve is probably too big because this line right here is still, it would wind up being 2 inches eased in. And I feel like I only want like 1 inch. So I'm kind of thinking that I need to like just kind of slash it right down the middle and make it smaller, but I decided I wanted to try this first because it is easier to make a sleeve smaller than it is larger. So I'm glad that I didn't just make that line down the middle like I said I would, make a tuck in the sleeve, because as it turns out I went and I pulled it on and it was way too tight, like the upper half of the sleeve. It was just so tight, like the point where you kind of can't bend your arm. So anyway, what I've done here is that I've actually decreased the seam allowance to about like 1/4 of an inch here, and that seems to have fixed it. So I just needed that extra ½ inch. It wasn't off by that much, but as you can see in the bottom of the sleeve, it's way too big. If this is supposed to be fitted at the wrist, we're talking like 3 inches too large, I think, around the bottom. So clearly I need to taper this significantly. That difference of, what did I say before, about like 5.5 inches that is on the antique between upper arm and lower arm is very much not me. I have a humongous difference between upper arm and wrist. So yeah, I need to take this in significantly, but while I'm doing that, I also want to actually set this into the arm's eye on mine just to see if this is totally wrong, because again, I did have like about 2 inches of ease here. Now that I've let it out, I have an extra ½ inch of ease. So I've got about 2.5 inches of ease that I think is going to be too much. I think the thing is that I need to probably cut down the head even more. That's my guess, but I'm gonna set it in first just to see. So I'm a little bit torn because while it is definitely more gathered up here than what I want, like it's doing kind of a little puff thing, I do not want that. It fits really well. So this is that hard part where you have to decide like, okay, how do I make it still fit in this manner, but make it less into the arm's eye? And this is what always kind of stumps me about fitted sleeves, because it's like, how does not compute? I don't know. And I don't know if like, because I don't think I want to pull it up any. It's fitting really well in like where it's laying. Oh, I hate fitted sleeves. I definitely have to take in the lower sleeve here. It is way too big. Probably, I mean, it's really just from the elbow down that I have to take this in. So this should be pretty fine. We'll just take it in maybe about 2 inches, I think, up to here, because the original was actually fitted to the wrist and had an opening a little bit right here and then closed with a hook and eye. So just part of the cuff whole thing. And so it's actually fitted to the wrist, not even to the hand. So I'm going to do a little playing around there, but this is the question mark. So I think I figured out what to do with this, and I've put it on inside out to be able to show you this. So basically I undid the entire sleeve, and then I just kind of pulled the sleeve up. I had, while I was wearing it before, like when it was still attached, I had kind of pinched up a little bit of the sleeve, both on top and also under the arm, and that seemed to help kind of everything. And so that's what I did. I pulled this part up. I think that's about, I haven't measured it, but I think it's like about inch and a quarter, inch and a half, something like that I've pulled up here. And then I've tapered it out to where it's pulled up a 1/2 inch underneath the arm. So the whole thing just kind of came up, and it wound up getting to a point where it is just a little bit eased in to the arm. I'll show you what it looks like on the other side in a sec. I have also taken in the lower part of the sleeve here. I don't think it's quite enough, but it's what I'm going to do for now, and then I might take it in more on the actual sleeve, but I think this is going to be good again for now. It's not to the point where I need the opening. That's the only thing. That's what makes me think it's not quite tight enough yet. But like, it's a really significant difference from bottom to top, and I feel weird about taking it in even more than that. So that's what I'm doing for now. On the actual, I will also have to let this actual seam allowance out, because this is the 1/4 inch seam allowance up here. And then, you know, here we've got a 1.5 inch seam allowance or something crazy like that. But yeah, I mean, it's fixed everything. Let me show you what it looks like on this side when I'm actually wearing it correctly. So this is what it looks like right side out. You can see that it's fitting a lot better. There's a lot of room right here, but I think that's caused by the tuck more than anything else. And I mean, the tuck is in the original one, so I did want to do that. I just don't really understand what it's there for, but it's giving me a lot of room right around the elbow, which I guess helps me bend it more. So anyway, I'm pretty happy with how this is now. I'm gonna go ahead and make some markings and then take this off and cut it, create a pattern, and cut my actual sleeves. The sleeves are all cut out, and I've done the pattern here, and now I've just done the pattern for the cuff for the sleeves as well. I'm still not entirely positive how this seam works with the opening, and neither were they, because that's where it gets really funky on the sleeve, but the cuff is the exact same width as the sleeve, both at the bottom and the top, and it's the same all the way across. But it is 3.75 inches deep here plus seam allowance, and then it's 5.75 here. So that's why we have the slope right here. This is on the bias as opposed to that is on the straight. So I did make sure to do that on the pattern as well so that I wouldn't forget that. And this line right here, this is the scallop edge, whereas this is where I actually cut the fabric so that then I can cut it off after I do the scallops just like before. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the cuffs out of the fabric now. I already cut the sleeves, and then do the scallops and then figure out how everything goes together. So the first step to what I hope will be how to put on the cuffs is that I am putting the right side of the cuff against the wrong side of the sleeve. Then I'm going to stitch from 2 inches down from the edge of the scallop, so right here, all the way around here, and stop again 2 inches down. Then I'm going to turn that so that I have nice sharp corners and all finished edges on the outside. So now that I have turned these corners right here, I've made just a little notch in the seam allowance right here so that they can be turned to the outside. So it will wind up looking like this right here with the seam allowance, because now I'm going to just lay these flat against each other and seam up the rest of the seam just like any normal seam until I get to this point. So naturally, now that I've clipped all these corners and clipped these corners and all of that, I just realized that I put these cuffs on with the wrong sides facing out. I forgot that they have a right and a wrong side because of the scallop satin stitches. So like, for example, this one with the blue line is supposed to be the outside. It's also a little bit smoother on this side. And this one, I didn't use blue for the bobbin, it's just white, so it mostly just looks like the ivory with a tiny bit of blue in there. And also this back side of the scallop is rougher. A, I don't know that I can undo this because like I've literally clipped all these corners and everything. And B, I don't know that I want to undo this because I wanted to be done. It's already past my bedtime and I really wanted to finish these sleeves. Dilemma. So I did wind up redoing the cuff. I put it the correct way out because it just looks a lot and feels honestly a lot nicer this way. So yeah, I fixed what I had done before. I already showed you that. And then I did right sides together all the way up the seam, making sure to get the little dart pleat thing in there. It's a pleat, not a dart, at the elbow. And basically, I mean, I had this marked, but really all I did was like, I matched up this end and matched up that end and then met in the middle and made the pleat there. And on this sleeve, my scallops met really nicely, but on this sleeve, unfortunately, they are not quite as nice, but you know what? Oh well. So this little opening right here, it's pretty nicely finished. I mean, it's got like this bit of the seam in there. I'm going to trim that back just a little bit. I actually already trimmed it back on this one so it looks a little nicer. And then this will get, I believe it's a hook and eye or hook and bar right here that will close that right there. Even though I don't really need this gap, like I can squeeze my hand through this opening anyway, even if it were shut, but I was just trying to be like the original one. So that's what I did. And the funny thing is that this cuff looks so hugely tall on me, but I didn't actually scale this up at all. I was worried that it was already just gonna look really tall as it is, like at the 5.75, I think, inch length right here. And so I did not scale it up. And yeah, it looks so tall. The other one, because of time and everything, it's just kind of sunken and crushed. And mine is nice and pressed. And so it stands up really nicely, but it looks so tall and stiff. So anyway, that is that on the sleeve. I have already done my easing stitch up here, so these are ready to get set in. This is what she looks like with the sleeves done. You can see those cuffs together. I'm super, super excited about how it's turning out. I mean, look at them together, adorable. And oh my gosh, you guys, I'm getting pretty close to finishing. So I still have to do obviously all of the decorative buttons and some of the other actual functional closures. I have to put the bodice part, attach it to the skirt. And then I also have to do the hem on the skirt, ignore my overflowing trash can, the hem on the skirt and the two tiers of those scallops, and that is going to take longer because I am going to have to like draw out those scallops freehand instead of just using a stitch on the machine like I was able to do for all of these. However, I don't think I'm going to have to do this sort of differentiating line on those because they're already going to be a darker color, I hope. So that's where we are now. Maybe I can finish it tomorrow, otherwise it should be the next day. So I have attached the skirt to the bodice and I'm just trying this on for the first time with the corset on for the first time in this entire process of drafting and patterning and sewing and all of that. It's the first time I put the corset on, which is probably a bad idea because something is very much not right. I am very much hoping that this is an issue of just the corset and that it will fit me fine when I take the corset off, but I had been hoping that this would fit great both with the corset on and off, only thinking about my waist measurement, of course, and not what the corset does to the rest of my body, because my waist measurement is pretty much the same in and out of this corset. But yeah, something, like I haven't gathered this part up yet, but something is not right. So little update, it is still not right. I've taken the corset off now, and there's still like, this is just too long. And I feel like this is going back to the original antique again and that tuck that was right here. And it's because this part right here, it's just too long. I mean, significantly, like we're talking at least 1.5 to 2 inches too long, I think. So I am going to have to reset the skirt to the bodice. Honestly, I think it's a little too long everywhere. Like even on this side over here, I feel like it's about 1/2 inch too long. Even in the back, I feel like it's just a little bit long. I also feel like Dora is going to try to jump on me. You could see her there from the corner, but anyway, so unfortunately I'm gonna have to reset this whole thing, which the setting was kind of annoying as is because I was setting 2 gathered pieces to each other, and that does appear to be how it was constructed. The 2 gathered pieces were set to each other, and then the waist stay band was put on the inside to kind of make sure that everything stays where it's supposed to. And I mean, once you have even just that initial stitch of combining the 2 sides, you are going to have some level of it's not going to stretch out on the gathering stitches because it has a solid stitch in there, and then the waist stay obviously takes that to a greater extreme and makes sure that nothing, you know, can even stretch or pop or whatever. But yeah, this has definitely got issues. And the other thing here is that clearly the corset does affect my body enough because like the bodice was too small in the bust when I had the corset on, and now that I do not have the corset on, it is sitting just fine in the bust. So I guess this is going to be a non-corseted garment. I don't know. I mean, in 1915, they definitely would have still worn a corset, especially for someone with a stout figure like myself. But I made it without the corset. So this is how we're stuck now because I can't just make the bust bigger. Anyway, I've got some work to do. So I have taken up this whole section. It's actually pretty significant. I've left the excess in there right now, but honestly, I'm kind of thinking that it might still be too long. If it is, it's really close at this point, close enough that I think if I decide it is too long, I might literally just like tuck both sides and make the seam allowance larger and do like a 1/2 inch shorter total, both on the skirt and on the bodice, because the skirt is, I feel like maybe just a hair long too. I've not hemmed it yet, but it does feel maybe just a bit long. And so I could do that. I have not changed the back yet. I just did it from here across and just on the piece that laps over the front. So yeah, I don't know. It still feels a little long, and I haven't tried it back on with the corset, but I feel like I'm kind of resigning this to the fact of this might not be a dress I can wear with corset. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, it still feels a little long. I should just do what they did in the original one because they clearly wore like a sash or something with it, sash belt, something like that, because that's probably why they had all the gathering stitches showing. They had that tuck in there, etc. They were like, I don't care. It's going to be under a sash. It doesn't have to look good. So it's really tempting to do that. Just hide it with a sash, not have to worry about it. So I think for now, I'm going to leave it as is and probably move on to the skirt decoration and then decide what to do at that point. So I decided that before I would go and do the bias trim on the skirt, I would try it on one more time, or rather I wouldn't try it on one more time, but I would alter it and then try it on one more time. So I did exactly what I said I was going to do earlier, which was I just literally like did another seam farther down that stitch line where I have joined them. I actually went 1/2 inch down. For the most part, I was trying to follow the grid in the skirt, but I think what that caused is this optical illusion in the bodice where I think it's hitting almost right, but because it's not following the grid of the check, it looks like it's dipping down here. So I think there's still something that I need to fix there just to make that grid even so that it looks even and is even and all of that. But otherwise, overall, it is so much better now. Like, it's almost unbelievable what that 1 inch would do. So it's a 1/2 inch shorter in the bodice. It's also a 1/2 inch shorter in the skirt because again, I literally just did another seam further down. So now that I've almost completely fixed that, I'm just going to fix this little bit right here, and then I think I can kind of finish off this area. I'm not sure what's happening right here. I think this is just a gathering stitch issue, so I have to figure out where this goes to and pull up the gathering stitches to match. And then what happens here is that this bit right here on the outer skirt, this gets bound with like a twill tape, and then likewise the bodice, let me just open this up to show you. The bodice inside here, where it is separate from the skirt, this will get bound with twill tape. So both of those get bound with twill tape, and then the waistay, well actually this one's not bound with twill tape, this is like literally just attached to the waistay, and the waistay goes around that whole thing. Of course, I forgot to check if I actually have the wide tape for the waistay, so I'm not positive that I can actually do that tonight. That might wind up being tomorrow by default, unfortunately. But I think I should be able to get close to everything else done tonight. We'll see. So once I do that tweaking and finishing, then I can do the hem on the skirt, and then I can do those scallops bits last. I'm seriously having so many problems with this dress that I'm about ready to throw in the towel for the night, and it's only 7:45. It just feels like I'm having so many problems with the closures, even though I feel like I'm so close to finishing this whole thing. And now the problem that I'm having is I'm trying to like fit all the closures, and I'm realizing that somehow this is huge. Like, I don't know if all my gathering stitches came out or what, but like, oh my God, where even is my waist? Not here, no, it's gone. So I don't know, I assume that that happened when I was attaching the skirt to the bodice for the umpteenth time, and now I have to run new sets of gathering stitches, I guess like on the seam line? I don't know, because I'm not taking it apart because of course I serged off all of this excess length that I did not need, and I just did it like one serge, so now the bodice is serged to the skirt as well as sewn to the skirt. So that's great. I have done the twill tape on the under bodice part, but not this skirt part, because this is what I'm now having problems fitting, because like the original one, I am winding up with this flap going way farther than it seems like it should, because I wanted this to sit right here. This would make it an even flap with the fake one that's on this side. But if I do that, there's like way too much gathering here as far as like where this skirt is going, and it's all bunching up right there, and it's driving me crazy. And I really wanted to, like, if not finish this tonight, I wanted to come super, super close to it so that I could finish it tomorrow, because I was hoping to take pictures of this on Friday. And this is happening. So it's just really frustrating, and it's feeling like a sad sack, and I don't even know what I'm supposed to do at this point. So that's great. So I think I've got it sorted out now, which is good because a little while ago I threw this across the room. It just needed a little time. Basically what I did was I took a piece of grosgrain ribbon, actually metallic grosgrain ribbon, because it was the only light colored grosgrain or twill or petersham or anything like that that I could use for a waistay. And I took it and I measured how far around it would actually need to be to get from like center to center all the way around on my uncorseted waist measurement. And I marked where the centers were, pinned that to where it needed to go on the bodice, and also marked the center back. And then I guess before I pinned that in place, I ran a gathering stitch right along the seam on the bodice to skirt, and then I pulled that up to fit the grosgrain, snapping the thread multiple times in the process, which then caused me to throw this across the room and go walk lion and take some time off and then come back. But I have now done that, and it is now attached to the grosgrain, all sewn on. I still think this is dipping down farther, and maybe it is just like continuously stretching, which I feel like that doesn't make much sense because it's not on the bias. This is the bias, but this is not the bias, so I don't know why it would be stretching. I digress. This I have gathered up. It is definitely still farther than it should be, but I've pinned a little bit of twill tape to it so that I know how far I'm going to make it. And I mean, hers was farther than it should be too. So it's funny because I'm running into all of the same problems that she ran into with hers, and it was just like, well, I guess mine really is going to end up like hers, and I'm not going to make mine better. It's just gonna have the same problems. So, you know, there we go. But once I sew that in place, I think that means I'll be ready for closures and the hem and the scallop trim finally. The closures I'm gonna have to do differently because she had like 2 snaps, 3 snaps, something like that on the entire bodice, tiny little like Barbie size snaps. And I'm sorry, but this is not gonna get held in by 3 tiny Barbie snaps. So I'm thinking maybe like a hook. The other thing that I noticed is that I wanted this to hit right where the stitch line was right here. I wanted this crossover, but it was just not fitting me right doing that. So I think I might undo some of the machine stitching here and stitch that by hand on the other side so it won't show through, because that means it'll give me more of that width to play with. So that's a little thing. I'll need the closure hooks here, and I will need to figure out what kind of closures I'm doing here, and yeah, a hem and scallops. But I swear every time I put this on I die of heat, and it's not even that hot out. So apparently this isn't going to be the summer dress that I thought it would be, even though it is cotton and linen. What can you do? Anyway, I've got some sewing to do. This is definitely not going to get finished tonight, but I will update you as I progress. So this is what the interior belt or waiststay looks like. That is the marking for the center front, which is, mine is a little different from the original, because it stopped at the center front, and then the narrow tape from over here actually met it at the center front, or even overlapped a little bit, like right here. So I did accidentally do that differently. I didn't realize till after I had cut this twill tape short that it wouldn't reach over here. So I just extended the waiststay there. Makes sense to me anyway, though. Helps to stabilize that area, and it goes all the way around, and then you can see how it's finished over here as well, just folded over and stitched down. I actually really like how that looks, where the twill tape is stitched to the waiststay, and the waiststay just has 1 line of stitching right in the middle. You can see how sparkly it is, but it's just the 1 line of stitching there, which is directly on the seam there. So that works. I have also pressed the hem. It is just a 1-inch hem, then like turned twice, so you know it's 2 inches total. And this right here is 4.5-inch wide ribbon that I pinned to the skirt to test both the width of the scallops and the distance between them. I think this looks really nice and balanced where it is, so I think 4.5 inches wide is the answer. The originals were 4. Mine, of course, will have to be cut both with the seam allowance and with the extra past the scallop, so I will actually be cutting them at 5.5 inches wide, and then I think there are 3.5 inches between the 2 scallops there. So that's for tomorrow. Same with closures. I'll need to do all of the closures on there and actually sew the hem, but that's by machine, so that'll take like 2 minutes. And that's it. So let's talk about how I'm doing the bias strips for the skirt. So each one of these is cut 5.5 inches wide, and I just followed the pattern so that the pattern would be the exact same all the way across. And then I cut my strips, and I did that with a scissors instead of a rotary cutter so that I could be more careful about following that pattern. And then I seamed together the strips. So there are 3 strips seamed together right here. I think I only need about 2.5, but there is a seam right in here where I've edged them together. I was trying to keep the pattern even at the edge. And then I drew a 1/2-inch line up from the bottom, and that is my don't go past this line for cutting off. And then this was the tricky part, to figure out how to do the scallops. I wound up using this spool of ribbon right here that has a random sticker on it, and I marked little spots on this ribbon where the edges of my scallops would be. And so I just made sure that it hit where the 1/2-inch mark was, and then I drew with my friction pen around to those marks, and then moved it over, and then moved it over, etc., etc. So there are a whole bunch of those. Now I am going to do one more test scallop on a scrap piece just to determine which color I want, because I did go out and buy a thread that was kind of this navy color, but after seeing like where I've tried to use navy a couple other places, it seemed a little dark, so I'm also going to try a medium blue. It was kind of a hard choice, but in the end, I have decided that dark blue is the winner. This one just felt too light and wishy-washy. I do wish I had gone for a slightly lighter blue than this dark blue, but I think that it still does nicely with the color in the check. And so this is going to be the winner. This, by the way, is done on a 0.2 stitch length with a 3.5 stitch width, just a regular zigzag stitch. So the scallops took forever to do, and then they're all top stitched on here, mostly following the grid lines. The lower one is always basically like exactly where the hem is. So the hem is a 1-inch deep hem, and the top of this is right above that stitch line so that I could just hide that stitch line. And then where this sloped around, since it doesn't always follow the grid, I just put the exact same distance in between the 2 tiers. But you guys, I really like how it looks. I think it's just really making it look quite right now. Unfortunately, it's like way late at night, and I still haven't done closures and buttons. So that's gonna have to wait for tomorrow, but we're not doing the shoot until like 5 o'clock or something like that, so I've got time. So I can't remember if I talked about the buttons that I had gone off to 2 different Joann's to find earlier this week, but I did. I went to 2 Joann's, found all these buttons, and now I've decided I don't like them, and these fabric covered buttons look, I think, a lot better. So that means I need to make 13 more of these fabric covered buttons. I only have 15, so I determined that I can get away with 15 buttons if I place them like every 1.92 inches or something like that. So that means I need to make a whole bunch more, and let me show you how to do that. Okay, so this is the type of kit that I'm using here. Obviously I got these on clearance. I'm hoping it's not because they suck, because the first 2 were kind of hard to do. But it gives you this on the back. It's a little template right here. So you cut this little circle out and you trace this onto your fabric, which I am using old fabric left over from my Briar Rose skirt, and it's 2-sided, so this side is a lighter color. I'm using the darker color. So I drew out a whole bunch of circles here, and then because this is a 2-sided fabric, I have to make sure that I put the correct side face down in this little mold right here. You just kind of want to center it over the mold, and then you take your button front and you push that into the mold. And it can be kind of sharp, so be careful. Once that's in the mold, you want to make sure that all of the fabric is nicely around it, so it'll look kind of like that. And then you're going to take the back of the button and put that on there. This is the little tool that it gives you to push that down and like set it all the way in. Honestly, it's really hard to do, and I cannot do it on this surface. The surface is too squishy. It won't give me enough pushback. So I have to take that over to either a hard book or to a hard surface and do it there. Sometimes you can get away with just pushing down really hard with your thumbs. I got half of it in. It did not get the other half in. You want to really make sure that it gets all the way in. So other times I will use a pen or something narrow that I can push it better with. I have even been known to use a hammer. This one is being super challenging. So I just had a bit of a thought, which was when I made my covered buttons for my other antique reproduction, which was my tea gown several months ago, those were bigger buttons, and I could use this weird hollow pipe that I have no idea why I have it to fit onto here. Like the blue thing was bigger because the buttons were bigger, and so it fit nicely onto there, and I used that to push it down. But I just had this thought where this time is the exact same size as this, and so I could use this for better leverage to get in there. So I'm hoping that that worked. Then you just push the button out and seems secure, at least for now. These have a terrible history of breaking. These Dritz covered buttons, they're really not the best, but they are the only. So I'm going to make all 15 of mine, hope that that works for today, especially since they're non-functioning buttons, and then I will probably go out and make extra buttons for this, because I highly recommend you make extra covered buttons for every outfit that you have, and you keep them handy so you can always sub them in if you need to, because they have a horrible history of the backs just coming off. So let's talk about the myriad of closures and finishings that I've wound up doing on here. So it has that grosgrain waist that I showed you before, and then I put skirt hooks here at the center front. So here's the bars and here's the hooks, those go together, and then there is one other skirt hook here, which is the end of like the collar and bodice piece, and that goes to here. And then there is one other skirt hook here at the end of this one, and that goes over here. That is the edge of the lap. Now the original one had snaps on the lap, but I have found that I don't think they were really being used on the original, and I didn't feel like I needed them because those snaps on the original were basically like here to here, so it was on the edges there, but mine no longer sit that way because this wound up going farther over, just like on theirs. And so it just didn't make sense to do the snaps. And then speaking of snaps, talking about the bodice, so the bodice on theirs had just 3 snaps, like one at the top, one in the middle, and then one actually, I think down here, this was a snap on theirs. And snaps just were not going to cut it for me. Like I knew there was too much riding on that to allow it to be snaps. So I started with just a hook up here, and then I think also this hook, but then I realized I needed more hooks basically. So that's why I wound up with the 3 right here that go over the bust, and then 1 additional, and then the big skirt hook down here on the actual waistband. And those go over here to these coordinating eyes. And this one actually helps to hold the collar in place too. So it's done through the collar. So that's nice. And then that one's below and then here. So these are just very like light. I mean, there's nothing on these 2 that kind of, you know, nothing for them to really adhere to. It's just the 1 layer of fabric, but these are nice and secure up here. And then likewise, everything on the waist stay is very nice and secure. So that's everything on the bodice. But then I also have the hooks on the sleeve to do these. And all of these hooks and eyes, or hooks and bars rather, they're all the same size. I think it's like a size 2 or something like that, but I don't know. We have that here and then the bar there. That is on there. And the funny thing is I went and I looked closely at their sleeves and to see like, okay, which side of the sleeve is the hook on, which side's the bar on, and it's different on both sides. And I think mine wound up being different on both sides too. I thought that, yeah, they totally did. So I thought that was pretty funny. The hook is here and the hook is here, just like on the original. So it's funny that a lot of the eccentricities of the original carried over to mine as well. I guess that's just kind of how this has to be made. talk about some final thoughts. First off, let me tell you about the accessories. So I have on a sash. It's actually just a really, really long piece of vintage ribbon, like this kind of super, super thick ribbon. I can show it closer to you on the hat, which I'll talk about in a sec. But yeah, it's just really thick ribbon and it's wrapped twice around me. So like the center is in the back and then it's wrapped all the way around again and tied in the back in the bow. And that worked super, super well. And I put that on while I was working on the closures so that I could see where the buttons needed to stop, because on her, she doesn't have any buttons between this one here and this one here because there was a sash, and hence why all of that like messy sewing at the waist did not show. So I realized towards the end of all of my messy sewing that, you know what, it didn't matter that it was messy. She obviously had all the same problems and she was like, hey, sash, that'll hide it all. And it did. So yeah, I made sure that my buttons didn't go under the sash because otherwise I would wind up with like the little bumps. So I only actually wound up needing, I think there's 13 buttons total, and I did mine 2 inches apart. They are, you know, spaced here and then also down to here. And this I just did until it got halfway down to the top of the scallops, because that is where her buttons stopped too. So I figured that was perfect. As far as the hat goes, this is just a blank straw hat with a flat crown that I had sitting in my closet, and I knew I had a couple of hats in there. Luckily I had the flat crown one that is also really large around the head, because hats in the 19 teens sat pretty low on the head. And all I did was I took more of that ribbon and I wrapped it around just enough for the crown. It's pinned in place and it's pinned to the hat, and then I also pinned a big old bow on there that's just a 4-fold bow, and it's literally all just safety pinned and straight pinned and everything to there, and is then pinned to this ribbon as well. So it's all pinned, it can all come off. I literally did this like a half hour before I left the house to go do all of the filming and everything, and it worked out super, super well. I think it just looked really perfectly right, and it helped with a lot of the sun because it was actually quite warm today. It was 82 degrees, and honestly I feel hot and sweaty here in the room now, but when I was out at the park doing all of the pictures and everything, it actually felt nice. Like the linen cotton blend fabric really took over and really had a chance to breathe in the fresh air, and that is what natural fibers are for. Oh, I guess one other thought that I should share with you is that I'm actually wearing the corset, the teens corset that I thought the dress totally did not fit over. This morning I was like, well, you know what? Now that the closures are on it, let me just try it on one more time, see how far off it is, thinking it would not work. And it fit perfectly over the corset. So I guess doing all of those other tweaks, because the last time I tried the corset on, things like raising the level of the bodice on the waist, and I think just doing the whole cross and everything, like all of that wasn't in place. And so in fitting that to myself, it also made it fit better to the corset. So undergarment wise right now, I'm wearing modern bra, modern camisole, bike shorts, like white sort of nylon-y knee highs, and my vintage petticoat, my vintage super, super limp petticoat, and then the corset. Well, the corset's underneath the petticoat, but it actually worked out really well. I didn't feel like digging through and finding my undergarments for 19 teens stuff, and honestly for 19 teens half the time I just wear modern undergarments anyway, so it worked out great for the park. And although I wanted to wear like my pumps that actually match this dress, or because they're ivory, they are not very comfortable, and we wound up walking all over this park that had like tons of molehills and stuff too. So I wound up just wearing my walking pumps that I wear like every day to walk lion, and they worked out great and my feet didn't die, so yay. So as far as the overall thoughts on this outfit go, I am super, super thrilled with how it turned out. I honestly think it looks so much like the original. I mean, obviously the fabric is slightly different, but I just feel like we are kind of twins here, and I love it. Like, I'm just thrilled. Some of the changes that I made were just really the things like the interior finishings, the way that she has the serging for her seams in the bodice and sleeves, and then French seams in the skirt. I just went with serging the edges and sewing it together on the machine. And then obviously I didn't find buttons like hers, but I really like these contrast buttons. I think that they work super, super well. And I mean, that is kind of about it as far as like changes go. Honestly, I mean, yeah, I think it worked out well. really happy with this, and I can't wait to wear it both for costuming events and also just to incorporate it into my modern wardrobe, because honestly, it's a nice comfy dress and I'm here for that. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me today for the remainder of this project, and thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. If you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon, and if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week, with my sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and other costuming content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi account down in the description below. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Heidi and Sharon. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!